Thank you. done. I am loved unconditionally. And I am not loved by the measure of love that I bring. I am not who I know. I am known by the King of all kings. Jesus, you are enough. Jesus, you are enough for me. Without you, I still have everything. Jesus, you are enough for me. I'll make a made visible, holding the world in your hands. Oh, you are patient and merciful, giver of grace without end. Satisfied simply by being who you've always been. You are infinite love and you prove it again and again. Sing it with us this morning, Jesus. Jesus, you are enough. Jesus, you are enough for me. With nothing, I still have everything. Jesus, you are Jesus. Jesus, you are enough. Jesus, you are enough for me. With nothing, I still have everything. In you I am created. In you I am sustained. With you I'm resurrected. You overcame the grave. With you I stand in victory. Now what else could I need you? I want nothing. Jesus, my everything. Jesus, you are enough. Jesus, you are enough for me. With nothing, I still have everything. Jesus, you are enough. Jesus, you are enough. Jesus, you are enough for me. With nothing, I still have everything. Jesus, you are enough for me. Jesus, you are enough. Jesus, you are enough for me. With nothing, I still have everything. Jesus, you are enough for me.
But we talked today in Matthew chapter 7. You have your Bibles with you or your device, however you choose to read the Bible. We're in Matthew chapter 7, and towards the end of it, we'll get there in just a moment. But I want to introduce you to someone this morning This man's name is Brian Berg, and you can leave that picture up there for just a minute. You may not be able to see it very well, but let me tell you who Brian Berg is. He has a very interesting career, and it is a career. He's known for being a professional card stacker. That's right, the structures that you see right here have all been made out of a house of cards. If you can see, Brian Berg is right down there, kind of in the right-hand side of the picture. You can see the scope and how big this tower was that he made. What you may have dreamed of doing as a kid or dabbled in for fun at various points in your life, he has done for a living. This is his career. This is the only thing that he does for well over 20 years now. And his quest and his desire to become a master card stacker started at a very young age. He says that his grandpa liked to play cards a lot, and he would make little houses of cards, but he took it to a whole other level. And he got really serious about it when he was in high school, when he set his first Guinness World Record for the tallest house of cards, which stood at an impressive 14 feet, 6 inches tall. And guys, what most of us couldn't do to a height of 14 inches, let alone 14 feet, Brian Berg does with seeming ease. This current picture right here is actually a little later on in life. His current world record for the tallest card house stands at an astounding 25 feet tall. Man, could you imagine that? That's insane. Could you imagine how long that takes to do? As Berg says in his own words, how tall could I build? The sky really and truly is the limit. I'm only limited by time and how high of a ceiling I have. In fact, in this project that you see right here, they actually had to remove some ceiling tiles in the event space so that he could build up into the attic as high as it would go. I have a couple more pictures here of this structure as it's being built, and he's up on scaffolding there. And then the final picture, which shows an upward shot of just how high and tall this structure is. His current world record holding structure required more than 1,000 decks of cards just for the tallest building in the picture, not even counting the other structures. That equates to 140 pounds of playing cards just for the tallest building alone. I want you to check out this video to get a better understanding of this impressive master builder.
We end tonight with an architect who makes buildings out of unusual materials, including diamonds. Diamonds, clubs, spades, and hearts. Chip Reed shuffled over to see if he's the real deal.
When Brian Berg was 8 years old, his grandfather showed him how to stack cards, a lesson he might have learned a little too well.
I never, ever intended for this to become my livelihood by any means.
He's been doing this professionally now for more than 20 years. We found him at the Horseshoe Casino in Baltimore, recreating that city's famous buildings along with the landmarks of Washington, D.C.
My Jefferson Memorial only has, 4 columns in front. The real one has, I think 8.
He holds Guinness World Records for the tallest card structure, almost 26 feet, and the biggest. This casino he built in China took 44 days and 219,000 cards.
There's the people who think that it's the greatest, most amazing, fantastic, beautiful thing they've ever seen. And then there's people that think that I'm wasting my time.
And that you're a little crazy.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm a little crazy, but who wouldn't be for doing this, right?
There's no glue and no tape, just an ingenious 4-sided honeycomb structure that he developed himself and that becomes stronger as each new section is added.
Can I drop a couple of cards?
I'm holding my breath.
Okay.
You're shaking.
Just a little. Boom! Oh.
So why did a guy with a master's degree from Harvard decide to stack cards for a living?
I'm trained as an architect, but this actually pays better.
Sponsors like Disney World and big casinos pay him well to build his creations all over the world. And there's another big advantage over architecture.
When my buildings fall down, I don't get sued.
He says the fact that his art is temporary doesn't bother him. He loves to build a masterpiece and then watch it collapse, just like a house of cards. Chip Reed, CBS News, Baltimore.
Berg has been commissioned over 10 times by Guinness to break his own world record, and as a reminder, it's one that has stood for nearly 30 years. So challenge to all of you, if you want to go out and start building houses of cards, you've got something to measure up to now. Have fun. But what is most interesting is what Berg says is his favorite part of the process. It says, my favorite part of a project is knocking it down because it proves I'm not lying when I say I didn't tape or glue anything else to keep the cards together. You see, what happens at the end of the project and knocking it down proves his point. And the same thing is true of Jesus' final words in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 7, starting at verse 24, says, anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise, like a person who builds a house on solid rock. The rain comes in torrents and the floodwaters rise and the winds beat against that house. It won't collapse because it is built on bedrock. But anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish, like a person who builds a house on sand. When the rains and floods come and the winds beat against that house, it will collapse with a mighty crash. And I was telling the Bible study group this morning, we would be tempted to end there. That ends the red words. We should stop probably paying attention, right? Verses 28 and 29 are very important as well. I want to read those. It says, when Jesus had finished saying these things, all of these things, guys, that we've talked about for the last several weeks in this Sermon on the Mount, the crowds were amazed, or they were astonished at his teaching. For he taught with real authority, quite unlike their teachers of religious law. And it is so often is the case in Jesus' teaching, the geography and the topography have a major effect and add emphasis on what he is really trying to say to his listeners. The location of Jesus' sermon and what he's preaching here, he's preaching around the Sea of Galilee or near the Sea of Galilee, and it provides a very natural setting for this parable that Jesus tells about bedrock and about sand. You see, the sand surrounding the seashore around the Sea of Galilee was hard on the surface in the summer months. You ever been around sand that is packed so insanely hard that it feels like it's rock? Yeah, that's what it was like, and that's what it still is like to this day around the Sea of Galilee. When you have the hottest temperatures, it makes this sand insanely hard. I mean, you would think that you could build something on it. But a wise builder in this region would not be fooled into thinking and to looking at things just on the surface. And instead, a wise builder would dig down sometimes, and this is historical and this is modern day. If you want to build a structure in this part of the world, you have to dig down sometimes 10 feet or more below the surface to hit bedrock. And then you have to establish a foundation for your house. The fact is, guys, there are many places in Palestine and there are many in Israel today where a house can be built on sand. It's possible, but it's not advisable. You know, there are many spots which, like I said, in the summer look like really lovely spots to set up a structure or to set up a house. They serve as easy spots to just throw up something and build it quickly. But in the winter, they become raging torrents of water. These regions in Israel are well known for sudden downpours that turn dry basins into raging rivers. And I want you to notice, if you're looking again at Matthew chapter 7, both times that Jesus describes the storms that hit these two houses, the same three elements are present in both cases: heavy rain, unexpected floods, and extreme winds. And all of these were features of this geographical region from where Jesus is teaching his listeners. And someone has observed, and what's so important about this is that these three features of nature are the calamities that can plague inhabitants of Palestine during the rainy season. October to April is part of the rainy season, but especially November to February over in Israel is the rainy season where 70% of the annual rainfall happens. And so you could go in there in the summer months and be like, this looks like an awesome place to build. Look at the scenery. Look how look how fast I can put up this building here on this sand. But when a rainy season comes, it all washes away. Guys, the point of this wonderful geography lesson that I have given you this morning is that every house, in the context of this parable, every single life looks really secure. It looks really good in good weather. But the storms of life will reveal the quality of the work and the foundation that's been laid by the builder, you and me. As theologian J.B. Lightfoot says it this: either we choose what is pleasurable and easy for the moment and we incur disaster later, or we choose what is difficult for the moment but will prove best when we stand before him. There's this moment that Paul is talking in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, and he talks about almost the very same idea that Jesus is talking about in Matthew. He's talking about this idea of a foundation. He says, starting in verse 10 of chapter 3, because of God's grace to me, Paul is talking here, I have laid the foundation like an expert builder. Now others are building on it, but whoever is building on this foundation must be very careful. For no one can lay any foundation other than the one we already have, Jesus Christ. Anyone who builds on that foundation may use a variety of materials, gold, silver, jewels, wood, hay, straw. But on Judgment Day, fire will reveal what kind of work each builder has done. The fire will show if a person's work has any value. If the work survives, that builder will receive a reward. But if the work is burned up, the builder will suffer great loss. It sounds almost to me like that could be taken and put right in the Sermon on the Mount, because it sounds exactly what Jesus has been talking about for weeks now. All things considered, in closing this parable, Jesus leaves no room. He leaves no questions asked that there's a neutral position on this matter that he's talking about. Either, guys, you are planted on a rock and you are firmly planted on that rock, or you are planted on sand, which, as we read the parable, is not a good place to be building your structure. It's not a good place to be building your life. He is very clear about this one thing. You will look for a foundation somewhere. Every person that is in here this morning, you are building something. You're building your life on something. You will look for a foundation somewhere. But as they say in real estate, one thing means everything. What means everything in real estate? What do they say? Location, location, location. Where you build is the most important. And just so we don't think this is a hypothetical situation that Jesus is talking about here, I want you to consider some modern day examples of poor foundation work. I don't have any pictures of this, but I was reading here recently. I actually heard about a documentary that's on Netflix tied to this, but I've been reading some stories. There is an actual place over around St. Louis, Missouri. It's called Bridgeton, Missouri. And they literally built an entire housing development on a landfill, a dump. Now, I think that's probably not a very good idea. I don't know about you, but do you want your house to be built on a dump? But anyways, they built this thing on there, and everybody's like, oh, these houses are amazing. They're so lovely. In fact, back in the day when they were first built, it was the rich, it was the wealthy, it was the elite who built their houses there. But they started to find problems in building a house on a dump. Can you imagine what those problems would be? Foundation issues. As the ground below started to shift and started to sink, it tore these houses up. If you want to go look this up, you're more than welcome to on Google. It has all kinds of pictures of houses that have actual splits all the way down them, splits in the driveway, sidewalks that are buckled up because they built this housing complex and development on a dump. Here's another good example of this today. How many of you have been to Florida and love Florida? Specifically in Central Florida, they have a massive, massive problem. It's called sinkholes. Picture one. That doesn't look very fun, guys, by the way. Could you imagine the kids just running around playing in the yard, just sucked into the earth? How about the next picture? Yeah, that doesn't look fun either. Like, some of the house stood, but that rest of the part of the house is in this sinkhole. And then the last one is probably the most devastating and impressive to me. Guys, that's from sinkholes, from not building on the right foundation, from thinking that everything looked really good when we built this nice and impressive house, but give it time and it will show itself to not be the proper foundation. In fact, sinkholes are such a big problem in this part of Florida. This made me laugh. They literally have a map for sinkholes in Florida. It's just weird to me. I was like, you guys might have a problem there if you have to create a map for sinkholes. And guys, of all of the things that might show up on an inspection report when you buy a house, foundation issues are the worst. In fact, if you decide to buy a house with a bad foundation, you're signing up to suffer a host of serious problems throughout your home, or you're signing up to pay the price, tens of thousands of dollars to have the foundation fixed. You know what most buyers do when they find out there's a bad foundation in a house and they get that on the report? I'm out of here. Next house, please. They don't want anything to do with that. And yet in our lives, spiritually speaking, sometimes we're really okay to build on shaky ground, to build in a place where there is a poor foundation. It just doesn't add up. It doesn't equate in my mind. Why do we do one thing in our life when it comes to physical homes, but in our spiritual homes and in our lives, we do the exact opposite? Charles Spurgeon, the old preacher, would say it this way: the builders in this parable are alike in many ways, but in reality, they are really polar opposites when it comes to substance and character. The one builder is wise, the other builder is foolish. The one is superficial, the other is substantial. The one is pretentious, the other is sincere. The wise man's work was honest work where men's eyes could not see it for what it was. The other man's work was only well built above ground. There was nothing of reality or substance in the hidden parts, and in due time the first builder rejoiced as he saw his house outlive the storm. The other, with his house, was swept away to total destruction. And one of the biggest differences that I see when I read this parable is revealed at the very end of it, and it's this: one of these builders built their house more quickly than the other. And guys, all of the busyness and all of the hurry is not good speed. Someone has said, there will be some who travel too fast to hold their life together. You ever been there? Feel like sometimes you live your life that way? All over the place. Okay, I got to do that really quick. Got to do that quick. Okay, I don't care. I just kind of fudged that right there, but whatever. I've got it done, and I got to move on to something else. Jesus says, whoa it up. Pay attention. Most importantly, pay attention to what you're building your life on. Now, I've spent a few weeks, in fact, I think at this point, this will be the third time that I've used Aesop's fables. I'm going to end today in this last sermon talking about one of probably Aesop's most famous fables, the tortoise and the hare. And it simply says this: a hare was making fun of the tortoise one day for being so slow. "Don't you ever get anywhere?" he asked with a mocking laugh. "Yes," replied the tortoise, "and I get there sooner than you think. I'll run you a race and I'll prove it." The hare was much amused at the idea of running a race with the tortoise, but for the fun of the thing, he agreed. So Fox, who had consented to act as a judge, marked the distance and started the runners off. The hare was soon far out of sight, and to make the tortoise feel very deeply how ridiculous it was for him to try a race with a hare, he lay down beside the course to take a nap until the tortoise should catch up. The tortoise, meanwhile, kept going slowly but steadily, and after a time passed the place where the hare was sleeping. But the hare slept on very peacefully. And when at last he did wake up, the tortoise was near the goal. The hare now ran his swiftest, but he could not overtake the tortoise in time. You know what the moral of the story is, right? We probably all know that fable pretty well. The race is not always to the swift, to the fastest, to the quickest, to the person who can just simply throw up the structure and throw their lives together. It doesn't always go to that person. The wise man, guys, had to spend an extraordinary amount of time in underground work. In fact, Luke tells us in his version of this parable that he dug deep, or he dug down deep, and he laid his foundation on a rock. Guys, could you imagine? Just stop for a moment and think how painstaking that would have been in the ancient world without the help of modern tools. The foolish builder took on a different route. He went a different way. The smooth sand was all ready, and it seemed so nice to build his house on that. And so he just started to sling stone, and he started to sling bricks, and he raised his walls, and everybody oohed and awed as his structure went up. And they're looking back at this schmo over here, and they're like, what is this guy doing? I mean, you're done over here, and this guy doesn't have anything to show for his work. And here is what is really quickly revealed in this story, and what Jesus is trying to get across to his listeners, and what I believe he is trying to tell us, and what we need to hold on to today. Guys, in your life, you need to build slow, and you need to dig deep. And guys, that may seem really labor intensive, but you won't be worrying about all the labor and all the sweat and all the tears that you gave the longer that you come, or the closer that you come to your end goal. When all of those people who were looking at you and mocking you and were in such a hurry to build their masterpieces and their preciously constructed lives and towers crashed to the ground. That's the end of it all. Be like, oh man, Ryan, this is not even right. Jesus, this is really hard. Like, you want me to do what? You want me to take all of this time to do all of this prep work? You want me to dig down deep? Do you know Jesus? I will sweat. And I'm not good when I sweat. I do not look good when I sweat. And Jesus says, that's all right. Sweat. Let other people laugh at you. Worry that you're not as far along in life as somebody else is, but when it all comes down to the end of everything and your life is still standing and it's not in shambles and it's not crumbling to pieces and everybody else's is around you, you'll understand the payoff. I imagine that the wise and diligent builder probably spent day after day sweating and working his tail off, and he went to bed whooped after a hard day's work. And for the longest time, he didn't have a stone above ground to show for it, because all of the important work, all of the foundation work was taking place out of the sight of others. His next door neighbor had an impressive structure that shot up and was easily admired by others before his industrious neighbor even had anything peeking its head above ground. Or what I sometimes think, that's usually the way that we read this, is we've got one guy who likes to do the prep work and we have one guy that's just like, get her done, guys, go, done. Could it be the other way around in this story? Could it be that the foolish builder actually waited too long and he delayed and he was forced into cutting some corners and to be lax in his building skills? There's scriptural precedent for that line of thinking. You remember the story and the parable of the 10 bridesmaids, don't you? 5 of them go out and they take some extra oil, and it says the bridegroom is delayed and he doesn't come, and so the other 5 who didn't prepare, who didn't make the preparations, ran out of oil and they had to run back to town and they totally missed the party. It's all a big story to tell us that guess what? If you are not prepared, if you are not building your life in the right way, when it comes to the end and it comes to Judgment Day, and there will come a Judgment Day, you're going to find yourself on the outside trying to get in. And Jesus in that story does not unlock the door. He does not let the people in. In fact, what does he say? I don't know who you are. Away from here. Or perhaps what these two parables, the parable of the 10 bridesmaids and this parable of wise builder and foolish builder, are meant to speak to both sides of the issue. We can't delay, guys. And we can't rush building a life. Neither is sufficient or a smart strategy when it comes to building a life that honors God. And here's what you need to know, and here's the truth of it all. Building a life may cost a lot in the short term, but it will pay off eternally. I think it was Luke last week that in his communion meditation said a very, very insightful and brilliant phrase. It is hard being a Christian. It is, my friends. It's going to cost you a lot here and now and in the short term, but it's going to pay off exponentially in eternity. Whatever it costs you in your life, make sure that you get dug down deep so that you will be able to withstand the storms and trials that will inevitably come in your life. And although the foolish builder constructed with much less effort, I mean, this guy was done with his house, kicked back on his hammock, sipping a lemonade and laughing at this other guy. He had much less effort into his work. He took the easy path. It cost him everything, though, in the end. The second builder constructed the cheap and the fast way, guys, but the cheap and the fast way never equals lasting. You hear that? That's fine. I mean, in life, if you want to say, I want the path of least resistance, I want easy, I want comfort, I want convenience, God will say, that's fine, I'll give that to you. But here's what happens at the end of all that. Your life will come down with a mighty, mighty crash. Guys, obedience and building a life is something that cannot be microwaved and hurried. You don't just wake up one day and be like, I want to build my life on God. Let's just figure out all the things I need to do. Like, okay, come on, give me the 25 things I need to do right now. Boom, life built on God. It takes a lifetime of doing this. fact, there's a book that Eugene Peterson wrote many years ago, and he talked about this idea of living the Christian life, and he called it a long obedience in the same direction. We play the long game as Christians. You see, when sands start to shift, it takes more work to keep up appearances than it does to do the hard prep work at the start of everything. You know, many of us operate with the old assumption, out of sight, out of mind. But guys, it simply does not work that way in the Christian life, in the spiritual sense. And what Jesus is trying to get us to come to terms with at the end of the sermon is we've got to wake up. And we've got to see where we're building our lives. You know what? The foolish guy in the story, we kind of dog on him. We're like, he's such a fool. He's such a dummy. Like, who would do that? Who would build their house on sand? I mean, I'm no builder, but it doesn't seem really great to me to build a house or anything important on sand. But guys, the foolish man in this story doesn't intentionally build a house that he thinks is going to fall. He has all the confidence in the world that his house will stand at the end of all things. But his confidence is in himself and his skills and his pride rather than in Jesus. And Jesus reminds us, guys, it doesn't matter how you've propped up your house or how you've fixed up your house or how you've spruced up your house or what people think of your house. Unless your house is firmly planted and founded on a rock, unless your life is firmly planted and founded on the rock, its fall will be stunning and spectacular. And most of all, it will be very sad. And it's sad for this reason, guys, because we have everything at our disposal in Jesus' words and in the words of Scripture to tell us exactly what we need to do and how we need to be obedient and how we need to build our life. And yet there are still some of us that say, I mean, that's all well and good. I mean, that sounds really great, but I ain't going to do that. I mean, where in the story does a second builder go wrong? Where do some of us in our lives go wrong? It wasn't, again, that he was deliberately building poorly, but he wasn't giving any attention at all to the foundation. Someone says it's not, as is commonly supposed, a question of two foundations. It's a question of looking to and neglecting to look to the foundation. That's the end of the story. There are no two foundations. There's only one foundation. And one guy looked to that foundation and he built on that foundation, and one guy said, I don't need that. And you see the results. Someone actually has insisted, and I think they're probably correct in this. Someone has insisted that the story of these two houses is about two kinds of Christians, not about believers and non-believers. You notice how the entire Sermon on the Mount starts. Jesus, it says, takes up his followers and his listeners to a mountainside. There aren't people just hanging around that have no connection or association or belief in Jesus. These are people who are supposedly following Jesus. The house of cards that comes crashing down is not the house of one who didn't hear Jesus' words. The house that crashes is a house of someone who finds Jesus' words important enough to listen to and to hear, but not really realistic enough to live and obey. Guys, here's the deal. I don't care how great you think your life is right now, how wonderful it looks on the outside. You're like, man, I've got it all put together. Some of you are like, I don't know what life you're living, buddy, but that's not mine. But some people, many people, a lot of people today think that. I've got it all going on. What more do I possibly need? And here's the thing, guys. Godly, wise men and women build their lives on Jesus regardless of the cultural weather. There's so many people that are going outside, I got it all figured out. Everything looks so good. I mean, it's like you stepping out on a nice 80-degree sunny day, not a cloud in the sky, and you're like, I don't have to worry about rain at all today. But before you know it, what eventually comes? The rain and the storm. And you weren't prepared because you weren't building wisely. And what's really interesting about this story is that the same storm hits both houses. A theologian by the name of Dale Bruner says this: a life built on the foundation of Jesus' words will not, I want to repeat this again, if you are following Jesus, Doesn't mean that you're going to be spared from the rains and the floods and the winds, as though Jesus' teaching were some kind of a lucky charm against trouble. And some people live their lives that way. Well, I follow Jesus. I believe in Jesus. I read Jesus' words. So it means automatically that Jesus is going to take care of me and I don't have to worry about anything. Pisha. That doesn't work, guys. Jesus is not some little rabbit's foot or lucky charm that we just rub and like, okay, I'm all good now. I'm out of trouble. Realistically, he continues to say, Jesus says the same storms hit thoughtful disciples as well as thoughtless ones. Obedience to Jesus' words then is not so much a protection from troubles as it is a protection in them. Just as a rock under a house doesn't shield from storms, it supports them during that storm. Guys, storms will come. And those whose lives are planted in Jesus will survive, and not just survive. This isn't a story about survival. It's about a story of surviving and thriving. If we plant our lives in Him and on the foundation of His words, we survive and we thrive. Those who plant elsewhere will suffer an amazing, amazing loss. And here's a question that I have for you to consider as we come to this point of the sermon. When the storms of life come, and they will come, and they do come a lot of times in buckets and droves, what is exposed in your life and your heart when a storm or a trial comes? In difficult moments of life, do you see your peace tied to something else other than Jesus Christ Himself? Do you long for security and comfort and refuge, but you go to something or someone else besides the author and creator of it all? And here's the real testing question of it all. Could it be that God uses testing in our lives and He uses storms in our life to expose the basest level of our affections and our allegiances? There's so much all over Scripture that speaks about God being a refuge and a strength and a foundation. One of those is Psalm 40, verse 2, and it says this very simply: He lifted me out of the pit of despair, out of the mud and the mire. He set my feet on solid ground, and He steadied me as I walked along. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 2. Get to it here real quick. I hate in the Bible when books are like really short and you just go right past. Anyways, Hannah is here and she has a prayer of praise, and she says in verse 2, "No one is holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock and foundation like our God." Guys, rather than simply just weathering the storms of life, because that's what a lot of us really do, is like, if I could just get through this and get on to the next thing, then I'll be good. Rather than simply weathering the storm in your life, wouldn't it be better to get to the heart of what is being revealed about you in any and every storm in life? And you guys, you could be pretty proud of your building, but if it is not set on the rock-solid truth of Jesus and obeying His words, it is a shoddy little shanty that will crash when the high winds hit. That's it. What your life is built on will be revealed when the storms of life hit. Obedience to Jesus' teaching is the only sure foundation for life. It's not what you hear, it's not what you believe, it's not what you plan, it's not what you profess, but it's what you do with what you know. What does James say in one of the most famous passages in the New Testament about this idea of obeying? James 1, 22 through 25 says this: "Don't just listen to God's word, you must do what it says. Otherwise, you're only fooling yourselves. For if you listen to the word and you don't obey, it's like glancing at your face in a mirror. You look at yourself, you walk away, and you forget what you look like. But if you look carefully into the perfect law that sets you free, and if you do what it says and don't forget what you've heard, then God will bless you for doing it." Not hearing it or listening to it, doing it. Guys, Jesus speaks this parable because he knows that one of the greatest temptations that a Christ follower faces is to hear and not do. I mean, why else would one of the hallmarks of Jesus' greatest call in Matthew 28, what does he say? He says to teach them, make disciples, and teach them to what? Obey everything that I have commanded you. Hearing, guys, without doing is foolish. Wisdom dictates that we practice what Jesus has preached. And at the heart of this parable is the call to make a decision. But that's really the heart of this whole sermon that we've been talking about for 7 weeks now. And it's at the center of Jesus' entire ministry. What is one of Jesus' biggest lines that he says in the Gospels? He comes to people and he says this, "Come, follow me." Make a decision about what you're going to do with your life. Guys, decision making is always at the heart of becoming a disciple of Jesus. And Jesus has the authority to call us decisions, and he's earned the authority not just because he's God. That's a really big thing, by the way. But he has the authority to call us to make decisions because he did the will of the Father. I've said it so many times. I actually just said it in Bible study this morning. I've lost count of how many times that I've said this. Jesus never calls us to a place or to do something that he hasn't already done himself. He always without fail practiced what he preached. I want to ask you as we kind of come to the end here, there are 3 kind of R's that I want you to consider and think about in your life. And the first one is this. How do you often receive Jesus' message? Because that's the base of everything. We have to be able to receive Jesus' message well. There are so many of us who do not take what Jesus says seriously. But contrary to what many people think Jesus' teaching is all about, including what the central message of his teaching is, his teaching features a very serious call to abandon ourselves and submit our heart and to submit our will to his lordship. And having listened for the last 3 chapters, and some of you have been here for 7 weeks listening to this, he calls us not merely to just listen to it and not merely just to hear it, but to do it. Obey it. That's how you receive the message of Jesus. Sam Storm says it this way, hearing is not enough. Admiration is not enough. Believing the truth of what you hear and admire is not enough. Memorizing and preaching and singing and celebrating and defending what you've heard is not enough. There must be acting, doing, obeying. Are you doing Jesus' words? Not to get something great from Jesus, but you're doing it because you love Jesus. Are you doing the words, or are you only reading the words, hearing them, thinking how fine they are? John Stott says we have a serious responsibility of ensuring that what we know and what we say is translated into what we do. Not only how are you receiving the message, but how are you responding to Jesus' message? And here's a thing that I understand about my life, and probably is true of yours as well. We know far more than we practice. There really are only 2 ways to respond to Jesus' message. You hear and you obey it, or you hear and delay. You neglect it. Jesus sums up this entire sermon by asking, are you building on rock, or are you building on anything and everything else which is just empty and shifting? And when everything is said and done in life, guys, the ultimate question will remain. The one question above all else will remain. What did you do, and how did you respond to Jesus? It's not enough to hear Jesus' words or even to lightly respond. We must build a solid foundation that combines commitment and persevering obedience. And guys, we are all building something. We're building on something. The question is, what will your building skills reveal when they are tested? And know this to be the case. This is what all of Scripture points to. Our building plans for our life will be squared up by God. Not by our judgments and not by our standards, but by God's. And how you receive and how you respond to Jesus' words determines what you will reap in life. Everyone is building. The only question is whether those projects are sustainable or sloppy, structurally unsound. Do you know how a disciple of Jesus is consistently portrayed and identified in Scripture? Really, it boils down to two things. People who are true followers of Jesus and true disciples of Jesus, and that's what Jesus is preaching about here. Who are the true disciples? Two things. One, they understand the moment. And two, very simply, they live accordingly. Do you understand that? You look at your life and you look around you and you say, what does this moment tell me? Ultimately about everything. What does it tell me ultimately about my life and how I'm building? And then they live properly into that moment. That defines and characterizes a true disciple of Jesus. Put simply, a true disciple is characterized by godly wisdom, and godly wisdom is defined in light, living in light of knowing what time it is. Guys, for some of us, that's why you came this morning. You just need to hear this. You don't really know what time it is. You've lost track of all time, and you don't understand the way things are moving in history and in life. And before you know it, the clock is going to chime, and it's all going to be over. It gives renewed importance to the old saying, begin with the end in mind. Jesus challenges his listeners. Guys, he's challenging us to know the moment and to bring your lives into line with the reality that is presented by the truth of the situation. Put really shortly and very succinctly, guys, life matters. Choices matter. And eternity hangs in the balance. Guys, it really comes down to this, and we've talked about this a little bit in this series. It's all about character. And character is what Jesus talks about throughout this sermon. It's certainly what he talks about here at the end of Matthew 7. That repeated obedient actions, positive choices, build the foundation of rock, godly character. Repeated acts of disobedience, negative choices, set a person's life up to be blown away when the storms of life come. They show really flimsy character. And guys, here's the truth. Character is won or lost in the little things of life, in the little moments of life, the little decisions of life. There is a classic saying that goes like this: sow a thought, reap an act. Sow an act, reap a habit. Sow a habit, you reap character. And you sow character, you reap a destiny. But when we ignore thoughts and actions and we neglect character, the opposite also becomes true. When we lack consideration of our thoughts, actions become neglected. When we lack care for our actions, a habit is lost. When we have no concern for healthy, God-honoring habits, character is forfeited. And when character is forfeited, our destiny is at risk. Because we subtly build our lives on comfort and privacy and entertainment and safety without making room for God himself to speak. And then when the rains of various trials fall, and they will fall and they will come, or the floods and crises come and they rise, or the winds of life beat against us, the once strong house suddenly falls apart. I'm convinced of this as I look around the world and the culture today. As strong and as secure as most people think their lives are, many of those lives are just quietly crumbling from the inside out because they've neglected the words of Jesus in Scripture. My friends, please, if you hear nothing else this morning, build your life on the rock. Allow Jesus' voice to be the regular stabilizing, guiding, shaping, correcting, and comforting foundation under your feet. Guys, as Jesus says here at the end of all of this, do the hard work of digging deep. So the worship team comes back up here and ends us with this final song. I just want you to consider this. I want you to remember verses 28 and 29. It says, when Jesus finished teaching all of these things, the crowds went what? Oh, they were in awe. They were astonished. But do you know what it doesn't say there at the end of that? It doesn't say anything about anybody's life being changed, transformed, people repenting and coming to Jesus. Here's what I really wonder is that if in all of life, whether it's today showing up here or the Sundays that we show up here and we hear Jesus' words, if we are like that crowd and we go, ooh, ah, oh, that's really good. That was a good one, Ryan. But we don't do anything about it. Our lives aren't changed. Our lives aren't transformed at all. That if you are here this morning, that's true of your life, you've either A, never come to Christ, you've never laid your life at His feet, submitted and surrendered to His Lordship, allowed Him to be your Savior, that today would be a day that you could do that. Or B, if you are a person that says, well, yeah, I mean, like Jesus, I'm okay with Jesus. Jesus is okay with me. But you haven't done what He's asked you to do. You haven't been obedient to what He's asked you to do. And again, not that this is a moment for you to be like, well, I need to be doing more things. No, stop. It's not what I'm saying. It's already been done for you. You just have to live into it and be obedient in it. But if you're in one of those two cases, in one of those stages and spots of life, this morning would be an opportunity for you to proclaim that I'm done building on shifting sand. I want my life to be built on a rock. That I'm standing up here and I'd love to pray with you. I'd love to talk with you. I'd love to help you take that next step in your life, that you can make sure that you're digging and digging and digging until you get to that foundation in your life. And you can stand on it at the end of all things.